Hi there, it's Mark, and I'm going to be talking about this book, The Penguin Book of Pirates. Arr! It's in various sections. There is, for instance, the 19th century and the Golden Age, and I'm going to be talking about the pirates that are mentioned before the Golden Age. And this book was gifted to me by my old mucker, my old mate Steve, so thank you, Steve. Interesting book in the fact that it's not like a written piece, it's just effectively primary sources put together, and it's been edited by Catherine Howe. And that's useful because we're actually seeing what people thought at the time of the individual pirates. And even at the very beginning with Francis Drake, who I don't think he was knighted at the time in which the account is given. No, it's 1570. So he was knighted in 1581. And that's interesting because the period in which I'm going to be covering is piracy. It's a long history. It goes into the Roman times and way before. And pirates all around the world seem to be converging towards the end of this early period in Madagascar, of all places, which I find astonishing that most piracy was done in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, and yet they were there and then going off long distances in perilous waters to get round the Cape of Good Hope to Madagascar. Unbelievable. And throughout the course of the age of piracy and full stop is this thin line between piracy and privateering. What is permitted, what is not permitted. If you got a letter called a letter of marque, you were allowed to become a pirate in all but name. It was a cheap way for a power, a monarch or a sea power, to get people to do piracy against the enemy, and they would not have to fork out for ships and men. That was down to the individual who got the letter of marque, and so on. So throughout, there's this debate. What, in fact, constitutes a pirate? And we start with Francis Drake, and he's on the Golden Hind, his famous ship. 1570, the Spanish Armada is a long way away, and it's a long way before he gets knighted, and he's about 30. And what's interesting with this, from a British perspective, because he's so well known to British history, famously on the Hoe in Plymouth playing bowls, when someone comes to tell him that the Armada's coming up channel, and he doesn't rush because he knew that there was no tide, there's no way he was going to get out. So that's why he didn't rush off to the ships. He knew the sea. But this is a guy, as pictured in the documents, is the kind of guy you wouldn't want to meet, I don't think. And the editor, Catherine Howe. And Howe, Catherine Howe, that sounds Tudor, doesn't it? And Howe, I think, was a great admiral as well. Sir Francis Drake was many things: an expert mariner, captain, privateer, slave trader, pirate too. He circumnavigated the globe, the first Englishman to do so, and in fact, 1577 to 1580. As Elizabeth I rewarded his exploits with a knighthood in 1581, so King Philip II of Spain levied a substantial price on his head for his capture or death. And the letter talks about his treatment on meeting Drake out in the Caribbean. And what's memorable is that we have this mythology of Drake as being like a gentleman because he was knighted. But he would have been a rough, hard-as-nails man. And it staggers me. So I'm just going to read a little piece out here. On his ship, he carries with him 9 or 10 cavaliers, cadets of English noblemen. These form a part of his council, which he calls together for even the most trivial matter, although he takes advice from no one. But he enjoys hearing what they say, and afterwards issues his orders. He has no favourite. There was a great English football manager called Brian Clough, who famously said, "I'll let you speak, but then I'll tell you how it is." But one of the gentlemen whom he had with him said to him, "We have been a long while in this strait, and you have placed all of us who follow or serve you in danger of death. It would therefore be prudent for you to give order that we return to the North Sea, because they're down off Tierra del Fuego, I think, where we have the certainty of capturing prizes, and that we give up seeking to make new discoveries. You see how fraught with difficulties these are. Okay, no doubt that would have been a complaint that a lot of people may have agreed with. Not Drake. He had him carried below deck, put in irons. On another day, at the same hour, he ordered him to be taken out and to be beheaded in the presence of all. Now, what's interesting here is that we have to remind ourselves that we can't look at the past with our modern eyes, our sensibilities. It's a no-no. We can't pass judgment. We can't say, you're breaking the rules of conduct, because at that time there were no rules of conduct. The morality of the age of sail was that the captain was in charge. He was a monarch at sea in his own right. With the Navy coming into more prominence with the British, they brought in the fighting instructions, and there were certain things that you have to have done. Admiral Byng, for not following proper orders. But that was a long age away. In this rough and ready Renaissance era Tudor period, things like that went. And if the captain didn't like what you said, he had ultimate authority. But of course, we are in the modern world, our modern world, and we're going to pass, I wouldn't say judgment, but opinion on his behaviour. Would you want to meet him today? And like I say, I'm not sure I would. The book continues with Grace O'Malley, who I'd heard of but didn't really know much about. And again, what's useful regarding this is that she was Irish and her name was not Grace O'Malley. That's the English name. And I've done an episode regarding this wonderful thing, Pirate Queen, the legend of Grace O'Malley, and the fact that she was alive at the time of Elizabeth the Queen and met her, Elizabeth I. Her real name was Gronja Niwalia. And fascinating story, because this is a woman who felt compelled to become a sea robber in protection of her family, because at that point the English were effectively trying to take over Ireland. And there were still Irish tribes, and she was out on the island of Clare, which is the west coast, and she was based there, and she had to take over from her husband, and she became really, I wouldn't say it's against her will, but not necessarily in her favour. She had to take to sea and become a privateer. From the English point of view, because she was against them, she was a pirate. So, wonderful life story, which I won't go into here because I've already done it. Now, she is somebody I'd love to meet. And we go through a list of people that some I'd heard of, some I had not, like Jack or Chuckle Ward, who was part of the Barbary pirates. And the Barbary pirates, the Barbary coast, went all the way from Tunisia all the way round into the Atlantic and Morocco. And specifically Tunis, Algiers, and a little small place near Rabat called Salé. The Salé pirates became infamous in this era. And they would go off to the Channel to take people from the Lizard, and which is a headland in Cornwall. They even went, supposedly, as far north as Iceland to try and grab people as slaves. And the great slave markets, great as in size, not because they were good, in Tunis and Algiers. It was a thriving business for the people along that littoral, which would, in part, become later known as the Maghreb in northern Morocco. But there were also pirates who would join them who were European. There were, I think Barbarossa may have been, because he was red-headed, he may have been from Europe. Jack Chuckle Ward was probably born in Kent. So the reason people took to piracy, because it was great wealth. Some felt almost forced into it. So, for instance, and I think I said this elsewhere, the British had indentured servants who put themselves under 7 years of almost servitude, slavery, to pay off a debt or to get away from being collared by the authorities and put in prison. So they ended up out in various colonies, the Caribbean. But because of the way they were treated, many often took to sea if they could do so and became pirates. And there's this wonderful piece here about Jack Ward. It's the true report of Captain Ward's piracies done by Andrew Barker, mister of a ship, and who was lately prisoner in Tunis. And of course, this is the era in which Cervantes was also a prisoner on the Barbary coast before he wrote Don Quixote. And just some lovely little statements here, whoever this Andrew Barker was. That since so many flying fables and rumouring tales have been spread of the fame, or rather indeed infamy, over the whole face of Christendom of this notorious and arch-pirate Ward, myself, who had even known him to be a knave, whose fortunes have been so much decayed by his prosperity. When you're reading reports of this era, beautiful language. But also the fact that at this point, these pirates are starting to become mythologized. They are now part of the meme culture. Anne Bonny and such, women and men at sea taking up piracy because why not? You're going to earn more money than if you'd gone to sea, say, as a merchant or a sailor on a Majesty's naval ships for whatever, and often become a crew of scattergoods and swaggering rascals. That's a great title for an album. I think the Pogues did Rum, Sodomy and the Lash, didn't they? And there's just loads of names, and obviously some are well known. Henry Morgan, who was knighted in 1674. A 17th century soldier of fortune. He wasn't bred to the sea. Knighted for his service to the crown, and having served as Jamaica's lieutenant governor, a high position, he made his base of operations the infamous pirate nest Port Royal, Jamaica. And you get these wonderful names now, are just so evocative. Tortuga, which was a pirate's nest. Obviously Madagascar, and Port Royal. Wonderful. There's a history of Henry Morgan, written by Alexander Exquemelin, or Hethkelemina, I don't know how it's pronounced, in the Buccaneers of America. And it said here, first from a history of Jamaica. Sir, I am now to present you with an abstract of a life. So of that era, that abstract of a life. That in all its parts is extraordinary and surprising. And it's about Henry Morgan. Where he bound himself a servant for 4 years and was transported to Barbados. There he was sold and served his master with a great deal of fidelity. But his term of years was no sooner expired than he shipped himself off for Jamaica, resolving to join the pirates, and he soon became famous. But they were always after money. Later, he says, the prize they took at Puerto del Príncipe did not amount to more than 50,000 pieces of 8, which when it came to be divided, was scarce sufficient to defray their debts in Jamaica. Therefore, they instantly resolved to go in quest of some new adventure. Interesting that they are pirates who are taking ships, but themselves have to pay their debts. There was a proper commerce, there's a proper economy which they had to follow. And otherwise, they could not have survived. It wasn't a case of pirates just landing, taking over a place and, making barbicane, which is a Spanish word, isn't it? Loads of roasted pork on the beach and then going off. They needed money. They needed commerce. They needed rigging. They needed masts. You have to get them from naval stores operators. And it's not, I think, how we often understand pirates to be. And one of the reasons they became pirates was because it was a true republic. They had a say. The captain had to listen to the crew, which didn't happen on a naval vessel or even a merchant vessel. Everyone had an equal part to play, but if they didn't play it, then obviously they would suffer. And as he said about Henry Morgan, they had to have an abundance of courage. Taking another ship is not easy, especially in the age of sail. pirates here, just to make final note of. One's called, I don't know if it's Mainwaring or Mainwaring. It could be pronounced either way. So Captain Mainwaring is a famous character from I think it's BBC programme, Dad's Army. But I've also come across it where it is pronounced Mainwaring. The Dread Pirate. Let's say Mainwaring. Like Henry Morgan, Henry Mainwaring occupies a shifting sphere of legality and illegality, depending on who is looking at him. A parallax of piracy. Born in the late 1580s, active in the 1610s and 20s, again in his 30s, he even sat in the House of Commons, in Parliament, and after his career in piracy, he enjoyed a career in the Royal Navy. I fell not purposely, but by mischance into those courses of piracy, he reckons. And often, if they became allied with pirates along the Barbary coast, one of the criticism that was often levelled at them is that they were said to have turned Turk. It's similar to the film Dances with Wolves. So Dunbar, the character played by Kevin Costner, is said to have turned native. It was like a slur by people saying, you've become one of them. And there's an interesting quotation here, and I think a lot of the quotes here, which I've put down, are really, if you are interested in the Age of Sail, and I am, of course, but it's not for everyone. So he talks about Ireland. Ireland doth much exceed it, for it may well be called the nursery and storehouse of pirates. Sorry, Ireland. In regard of the general good entertainment that they receive there, the pirates, and this is going back to the time of Gronwy y Walia, supply of victuals and men which continually repair thither out of England to meet with pirates. So you've got Ireland off the west coast of England. And England, people fed up with their lives or running into debt, would deliberately cross over the very short, narrow strait to Ireland so that they could hook up with pirates and then they go off pirating out in the Atlantic and beyond. It must have been a great call. People would have known about it, talked about it, looked or longed to become a pirate to get away from what they were suffering in England. And at this point, and this is the early 1600s, we're not far from where troubles were going to start eating away in England, which would lead to the Civil War some 30, 40 years later. The south, the west, and the north coast are so full of places and harbours without command that a pirate being of any reasonable force may do what he listeth, and that's in Ireland. The common sort of seamen, even those that willingly and wilfully put themselves into these courses of piracy, are greatly emboldened by reason of a received opinion and custom, that is here for the most part used, that none but the captain, master, and it may be some few of the principal of the company, shall be put to death if they're caught. To punish them, unless it be a little lazy imprisonment, which is rather a charge to your highness than any affliction to them, since their whole life for the most part is spent but in a running prison. Interestingly. So it's saying that the pirates didn't care for being caught because they thought they would not be punished. It's the captain who would be punished. And if you read accounts, it's normally always the captain that's captured and then put on trial. Certainly in this point. And I suppose because of the want of sailors, if they were taken, they were offered their liberty if they were to join a navy ship, for instance. But they were in a prison anyway. I mean, when you're at sea in a ship, it is a prison. Amazing. And what's that famous line from Master and Commander? A lot of people join ships because they're drier than some of the prisons on land. Because they're just full of mould and dripping and wetness. Many pirates in small ships, a few in number, that have been out for a while, having gotten some purchase, clear themselves by running their ships ashore or sinking them, and so saving themselves in boats, whereby they are the less noted, far from the place of their abodes. In this course, their opinion is that they either go clear or they may be taken. Officers, if they are captured, often colourably discharge them. So you have these little things that the pirates, it's often overlooked, isn't it? The pirate ships, which we see in film as being big black sails, no, they wouldn't do that. They'd be too noticeable. You've got to hide, you've got to slink away. Speed is the essence. And then, if they do capture a ship, they'll sink it and take to the boats with what they can, and then go ashore to get rid of it, join up again somewhere at a rendezvous, and off they go again. If they can but take a good English ship and be able to return or satisfy their losses, they doubt not but to find friends to get their pardons for them. They have also a conceit. Needs be wars with Spain within a few years, they shall get a general pardon. And if there be no hope of a pardon, they've got Leghorn or Villefranche as ports, Leghorn being Livorno in Italy, which will be free for them, and there they go. And what the Mannering is talking here, and he obviously was his own pirate, is that those abuses really had to be stopped. If they wanted to get rid of piracy, the British, the English, they had to do something about the ways in which the pirates operated. And what's useful of this, he gives little statements about how they operated at sea. So you can imagine dawn coming up somewhere off the coast of wherever. In their working, this is the ship, they usually do this. A little before day, they take in all their sails, so you've just got bare poles, and they lie a hull, it's called, till they can make what ships are about them. That's not pleasant, because in a swell, the ship rocks the harder because it's not moving, it's not stable, and the poles act like a pendulum, a greater weight, so they'll be like this for hours, waiting. And if they can make ships about them, they'll then put up their sails and start to make a course towards them, so that they may seem to such ships as they seem to be merchantmen on their course. If they be a fleet, then they disperse themselves a little before day, some league or thereabouts asunder. In other words, they range out, and they just try to seem by subterfuge as though they're just mere merchantmen, idling off the coast waiting for the wind. But if they come across ships that they want, they will do everything to seem as though they're laggardly, slow. They'll put sails into the water, they're called drags, so that from the ships coming over inquisitive, they seem as though these guys don't know what they're doing. They're all over the place, they're slow, they may need help, so that when the ships get closer unawares, then the pirates put up all their sails and they turn around at greater speed, and then they clap or they go over to board the ships. In chase, they seldom use any ordnance or guns, cannons, but desire as soon as they can to come aboard and board. And the reason that the pirates often didn't use cannon was because it would ruin the other ship. If they could capture it, perhaps sell it, great. Although, according to Mannering, they would often try and sink it. Fascinating book, really insightful, because, as I said, we're getting a lot of reports written by people alive at the time. I won't go into it, but this guy, Alexandre Exquemelin, whoever he pronounces his name, I think it's French, talks about the manner in which the pirates arm their vessels, how they regulate their voyages, and so on. There's one guy here I personally want to get more details on. He's called Long Ben Avery, who as a young man got to sea. He was probably a nobody, but ended up becoming a pirate king. And he was in Madagascar. And he would sail as far as Barbados, San Domingo, Martinico, the River Indus. I think it was him who alarmed all the world because he took a huge, massive prize in the Indian Ocean that really upset a Dey that sent an embassy to England to sort this out. It could have caused a major international conflict. And Avery was known, or he grew wanton in cruelty. And then finally, William Kidd, who operated in Madagascar and New York. It's a fantastic book, really enjoying it. And it just goes to show that although there is a golden age, really the whole of the piracy is replete with names that we kind of know if you're into history, or certainly the history of the sea. And in a way, at this point, apart from one or two towards the end, just as the golden age is dawning, and it's not golden age because it was great, it was the golden age of piracy because the sheer amount of them, the world moved into a period in which piracy suddenly became possible and lucrative, because as the European nations expanded out with their colonies, much toing and froing with merchant ships. It was the Spanish, it was the Portuguese, it was the Dutch, it was the British, it was the Italians and so on, the Americans. So much shipping that you could take that it just encouraged people who couldn't be bothered to work as indentured servants or in poverty on land. They were going to go to sea, be treated with the respect that they wouldn't get anywhere, and so long as they did their job and acted under the guidance or the orders of their captain, they could go a whole life and get very rich, or certainly enjoy themselves. And you can see, with a little bit of consideration, I wouldn't say you feel sympathy for them, but you can see why they did it. Brilliant. Really, really good book. I'm going to go on and continue reading as to the Golden Age with, for instance, Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and so on. Schooner Jane. Brilliant names. Samuel Black Sam Bellamy. So there you go. The Penguin Book of Pirates. Definitely worth a read. Ta-ta for now.